Senator McPhedran, on debate.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. This, as many know, is actually my first speech in the chamber. And thank you. Honourable Senators, I rise today in reply to the speech from the throne, given in this place by His Excellency the Right Honourable David Johnston, Governor-General and Commander-in-Chief of Canada, on Friday, December 4th, 2015, to open the first session of the 42nd Parliament of Canada with the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister. As a recently appointed independent senator from the province of my birth, Manitoba, this is my first opportunity to respond, and as a human rights lawyer and professor, I will address aspects of the throne speech as they pertain to some key issues before us in this session. Colleagues who are interested in legal analysis of our constitutionally entrenched rights will be familiar with how some eminent scholars have written about our Constitution as a dialogue between our courts and our governments. But on another Valentine's Day in 1981, 36 years ago, here on Parliament Hill, a trialogue began with women in Canada that led to changes in our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms while capturing headlines nationwide. The then Trudeau government had cancelled a conference that was to focus on women, prompting an ad hoc committee of Canadian women on the Constitution to announce that women would not accept that exclusion, and the ad hocers, as they became known, decided to launch their very own conference, however unofficial. Women parliamentarians crossed party lines and invited us to gather on Parliament Hill. As one of the conveners, I remember particularly the feisty, gracious welcome extended to us by the late members of Parliament, Flora MacDonald, Pauline Jewett, Margaret Mitchell, and Senator Martha Beelish. The 1981 ad hoc conference was the largest social mobilization that Canada had ever seen on women's constitutional rights, until the women's marches in Canada, held in solidarity with the Women's March on Washington just weeks ago, on January 21st, eclipsed the 1981 numbers. I was in Washington on January 21st, marching for the first, but not the last, time as a senator. On February 14th, 1981, though, over 1,300 women and a few men, unfunded by government, overflowed the Confederation Room 200 in the West Block. And what they set in motion changed our Constitution, with eventual amendments that strengthened equality rights in Section 15 and added Section 28, the Made in Canada version of an ERA, an Equal Rights Amendment, similar to what our American sisters had been fighting for since first proposed to the U.S. Congress by suffragist Alice Paul in 1923. Back in 1981, I was among the thousands of Canadian women who mobilized and lobbied for stronger women's rights in the Charter, not just once. Following the conference in February 1981 that I co-chaired, and where I met our just retired and inimitable colleague, the Honourable Nancy Ruth. But ad hocers had to mobilize again in November of that same year to beat back the new Section 33 override charter clause that threatened to eclipse the Canadian Equal Rights Amendment, Section 28, which states notwithstanding anything in this charter, the rights and freedoms referred to in it are guaranteed equally to male and female persons. In the throne speech, we were promised real change. So where do we find Canada ranked internationally on women's rights today? Canada's ranking on the UN Gender Equality Index has slipped from first in 1995 to 25th in 2016. And a major indicator that dragged us down is the incidence of racism and violence experienced by Indigenous women and girls in Canada. Back in 1981, Canada was not only crafting a new constitution with an entrenched rights charter, but Canada also ratified the only major UN human rights treaty dedicated to women, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, generally referred to as CEDAW. The decision to ratify CEDAW was likely influenced by Canada's international embarrassment when the UN Human Rights Committee held that Canada had violated Article 27 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights through Canada's Indian Act, as a result of the courage and tenacity of our now colleague, Senator Sandra Lovelace-Nichols. A few months ago at the UN in Geneva in October, Canada reported to the CEDAW Committee of experts from 23 countries elected to monitor progress in implementing our international legal obligations on women's human rights under CEDAW. Over 100 Canadian civil society organizations made their voices heard through a coalition coordinated by the Feminist Alliance for International Action, or FAFIA. The CEDAW Committee released its assessment of Canada in November, and about 10 days ago, FAFIA sent each of us a summary of those findings. FAFIA noted that the UN CEDAW Committee expressed concerns about women's inability to fully exercise their civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights in Canada, concluding that women's rights are not yet fully implemented and protected in Canada. The CEDAW Committee recommended major action. You can find their report at the website of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, ohchr.org. The throne speech promised, quote, new investments in social infrastructure. Social infrastructure should mean recognizing that child care centers and jobs for child care workers earning decent wages are part of Canada's needed social infrastructure. Today, about 60% of women work for pay in Canada. They are almost half our workforce, and 2/3 of them have children under 6 years of age. For women, having safe, affordable places where their children can be cared for while they work is essential. It's essential for families. Childcare is, as now Madam Justice Rosalie Abella of our Supreme Court said so many years ago, the ramp to women's equality. Sadly, yesterday, this did not seem to be a top concern at the roundtable in Washington of women business leaders with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and President Trump. But it was heartening to hear, quote, we discussed how to secure that everything that we know the full power of women can do better than anybody else. We must work to address the barriers faced by women. That would be the grammar from the 45th president, not mine. Which brings me to the throne speech and electoral reform promises and the impact on women's political participation, also a commitment in the CEDAW Treaty. The Interparliamentary Union ranks Canada as 62nd internationally for women's political representation in its national parliament. Just 26% of federal members of parliament are women. Nationally, elected women's representation increased, but it increased by just 1 percentage point after the 2015 federal election. At this rate, Equal Voice has projected that it will take up to 90 years before we see gender parity among members of parliament. Women are not running for office in equal numbers as men. Women made up just 33% of candidates in the 2015 federal election, and in 98 of Canada's 338 federal ridings, the candidates for the major three parties were men. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is making history through appointing an unprecedented number of women to the Senate as independents, and I am honored to be one of them. But I must respectfully and firmly express my profound disappointment that changing Canada's first-past-the-post electoral system is no longer a priority for the government. I am in this chamber committed to a more inclusive democracy, with emphasis on alliance with Indigenous peoples and building pathways to reconciliation here in Canada and globally, with particular attention to youth and women's leadership in our constitutional democracy. To quote Liberal Member of Parliament Nathaniel Erskine Smith in his Huffington Post article entitled, quote, "I'm deeply sorry that my party broke its promise on electoral reform," end of quote. He went on to say, there was a significant consensus among experts at the special committee that our system should be more proportional. There was also a significant consensus among Canadians that we need a more cooperative government that works across party lines. And most importantly, there was a significant consensus among parties on the process to change our voting system. Youth, who are so often told that they are the leaders of tomorrow, to them I say, no, you are the leaders today. And the truth is, millions of youth feel betrayed by abandonment of effective electoral reform. I've worked in universities in Ontario, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, and feel honored to have been able to spend most of my time with younger people since founding the International Women's Rights Project at York University in 1998, when I started to bring students to Parliament and the UN to demystify national and global governance. The engagement of youth in the last election is understood to have been a key factor in deciding who now is our Prime Minister. Social media is still sparking with hurt and disappointment that they have been denied electoral reform. Let me remind us that the throne speech promised, quote, to make sure that every vote counts. The government will undertake consultations on electoral reform and will take action to ensure that 2015 will be the last federal election conducted under the first-past-the-post voting system. Recent multi-year research conducted by Dr. Grace Lohr of the University of British Columbia, with statistical analysis and in-depth interviews in 7 countries, noted that the number of women actually elected is typically higher under proportional representation systems. According to the United Nations, to the Interparliamentary Union, and the global database of quotas for women, worldwide, women hold more than 25% of seats in countries that use proportional electoral systems, and less than 20% in most countries that use plurality majority systems. Mr. Speaker, as I come to a close, I want to bring a human rights lens to the throne speech reference to security and opportunity, stating that Canada is fundamentally a safe and peaceful country with constitutionally entrenched and cherished rights and freedoms. In 10 days, there will be a gathering of Muslim youth on the Hill, hosted by an organization I've been honored to serve as an advisor, the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, which is very concerned about exclusion of their youth and how to build a more inclusive democracy. Colleagues, my last point is partly a question. How does exclusion and stigmatization of youth strengthen our democracy? At another time, I will be speaking further in support of Bill C-16 to add gender identity and gender expression as prohibited grounds for discrimination under the Canadian Human Rights Act, long after this has been done in many provincial human rights codes, as well as adding protections for trans Canadians to the hate propaganda section of the Criminal Code. But I want to make one observation that I hope can be heard and taken into the hearts of my colleagues in this place who are opposing the amendments and blocking us from considering this bill passed some time ago in the House of Commons. Last week, when Senator Plett was here, I heard him speak of his opposition to C-16. And I have read some senators' concerns that C-16 and new grammar on trans rights will infringe on their rights. I am not able to find any legal substance to these concerns. But, as my fellow senator from Manitoba spoke, Senator Plett referred to these people or those people. And to my ears, I heard othering. Othering can be understood as an indicator of bigotry. Colleagues, bigotry does not strengthen an inclusive democracy. C-16 passage is an essential step towards progress in Canada's widely acknowledged national human rights framework being strengthened, and an investment in our constitutional democracy predicated on equality rights. Megwich, merci, thank you.